I didn't start comedy till I was 38 years old. That's hella late, right? I'm not even supposed to, I don't think I'm allowed to use the word hella, but I did. And so now all of a sudden, like, how do I parlay that into, a career? And what does that even look like? I have no idea. Hey everybody, welcome to the first inaugural episode of Jaywalking. And I'm your host. I'm Jay Yoder. Pleasure to meet you guys. So glad you're here. If you know me, thanks for listening. And today we just want to get into, why am I doing this? And one of the things I always thought about is anytime somebody's heard my story, anybody's heard my stand-up, the first thing I get from someone is, dude, your life is a sitcom. And I grew up on sitcoms. I think that for me, those showed me what family could be like, or if I watch Boy Meets World, what school life was like. And I think about how much they shaped me as a latchkey kid who oftentimes watched a lot of TV when no one was home. And I think it's super interesting. So we're going to be getting into just life unfiltered. That's what this is about. This is I don't know the answers, okay? So if you're looking for, it's going to continue to be some unsolved mysteries. But for most of the time, we're just going to be talking about life, things I've experienced, as all the different roles I've played, which I think is what makes people think my life is somewhat of a sitcom. And I kind of like that analogy because it's a perspective that I have that I hid for a while. I didn't let my light shine, as they say. And now it's time that, after COVID, I think we all sort of, the word of the day today is going to be tuning fork. You're going to hear me talk about this concept of a tuning fork. And that's going to be sort of our through line for the first episode as you kind of get to know me a little bit and what we're going to be talking about on this. And with my life being a sitcom, I think a lot of people think this because for 20 years, I've been a public school teacher. Not just a public school teacher, but I taught at all levels. I've taught at elementary, middle school, high school, and I grew up in Scranton, but I speak Spanish and I teach Latin. And I think these are things that are super unique that in 2025 you don't see. But not just that, but after 20 years, I said, hey, I'd like to start being a stand-up comedian. And that's crazy. First you're like, okay, open mic on a Tuesday night at 6 o'clock. But last night I just finished 5 sold out shows opening at Helium Comedy Club in Philly for a huge comedian named Joe Dombrowski, Mr. D, good buddy of mine. Shout out to him. But it was amazing. I've been on tour with a group called Board Teachers. So some of you may know me from that. And so that was such a dream of mine that I didn't know I had, because I wasn't letting myself pursue dreams. I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do in life. I thought I was following the stencil. And we're going to talk a little bit today about a book I read that kind of was the thing. And okay, when I say read, I listened to it on Audible, so don't judge me. But as I'm on all these road gigs, I often like to listen to stuff, and true crime was messing up my head. I'm checking the microwave timer every time I lock my door at night to start a police report that didn't need to happen, So now I'm listening to all different things. But somebody turned me on to a book called The 4 Agreements, and so you're going to hear me talk a little bit about that today as we explore this tuning fork. But besides being a teacher who said, oh, I want to be a comedian, who then's doing it, I also have this crazy, unique life. I'm a dad, but I'm also a special needs dad. I have a daughter with autism, and I didn't know what that meant. I had a hard time with that 11 years ago when she was born and 9 years ago when she was diagnosed. And now I love talking about it, whether I go speak to groups, whether I crack jokes about it. And even when I make jokes about it, she's the hero. It's me and my inability to kind of get on board or play double dutch with what that meant. That is sort of what I love to talk about, because I think a lot of parents probably feel that way. And so I want to explore some of those topics that I was feeling that I'm sure other people are feeling, because every time I do a show and I talk about my daughter, I end up having beautiful conversations after the show with people who are either autistic themselves or the parents or the paraprofessionals who work with them. And we have these amazing conversations about how much we needed to laugh about it. If it's mentionable, it's manageable, right? That's from my Mr. Rogers neighborhood days. So another great show that I loved to watch as a kid. So, I'm an autism dad. I also have a neurotypical daughter. I love how they interact, this beautiful Anna Elsa thing. So I was an only child, so I don't have this concept of what it's like to, and, I'm a guy, so I'm raising 2 girls. I also have a really unique family you'll hear me talk about. I have what I like to call queer roots but straight branches. I was raised by 2 women. My parents my biological parents had me. They played house. And then they decided that they were both gay. And, I don't say decided. I think that's the wrong word, but they both allowed themselves to pursue who they really were. And in 80s Scranton, you couldn't do that. It wasn't like today. Or, Ellen was still straight. But seeing how they lived their life and we kind of created this little witness protection dossier that was frustrating. So I want to talk through some of that stuff because I think a lot of people feel that way. And we're in times now where it's uncertain how you're allowed to talk about those things. So we're going to do that. This is Unfiltered. But I have all of this interesting past. I'm a husband now. I have a beautiful wife who had 2 amazing children. I think just that part is also interesting and want to talk about. I've been a world traveler. I've traveled to like 26 different countries. I studied in Argentina as a student in high school. I studied in Spain, in college, and I grew up in Scranton where you barely left the county, never mind the country. So there's just so much to talk about, so much that I hid for a long time because I didn't think I was allowed to open up to who I really was. And now it's time to talk about it. It's time to have all of those things. And today we're talking about following a dream because, man, mid-pandemic was not laughing much. I don't know about y'all, but it was nice to be home and I got to spend a lot of time with my family, but it came with huge challenges, things that the girls weren't understanding because they were so young. And if it wasn't for shows like Impractical Jokers, we needed to laugh. And so that's sort of what happened. I was my wife and I, our last date before COVID was an indoor comedy club called Soul Joel's. It was right in our backyard. It was amazing. We loved comedy. And then all of a sudden we're like, let's go. And we went and had a great time. That was Valentine's Day of 2020. And then March, boom, everything shut down. But this place found a way to stay open and have outdoor, socially distant comedy. And we would go make it our date night every Tuesday night for the open mic. And I just said to myself at one point, for maybe 3 months, we would go and watch. I just looked at Amanda. I was like, I think I could do that. And I was so burnt out from teaching at that point because I was sort of like Atlas. I was helping the Flintstones meet the Jetsons with technology because I was always really good with technology. And I was just done. I was ready to I just couldn't look at my email anymore. And the only thing that kind of took me to recess was going to this comedy show. And then I realized, well, if I'm part of the comedy show, when I'm not at the comedy show, I can put some time into writing jokes and entertaining people, and maybe they won't laugh, but everybody was going to be entertained. And then they started laughing, and it was like, wow, maybe it's more than Sunday night softball. And so that's what I want to kind of explore today is how that path happened. And I think because we all have dreams, we all have things that we're doing. I'm sitting here in a studio right now that is Simmons Media in Westchester Studios, and this was actually a former student of mine. Is the head honcho. His name is on the shirt, and I was just talking to him before we got started about that. I was like, and I'm gonna ask him in a second here, when did that happen? Because I knew him as a student. I had him for all 4 years. I think was it homeroom? Was that homeroom? Yeah. So we met maybe every other day, or you had 10-minute pockets. But for 4 years, I got to read your name at graduation. I think too, right? Yep. So at what point for you did you think, oh, Simmons Media, because I feel like in media, when you guys do that, you could have just interned at another company that already existed. What made you say, no, I want my own?
Yeah, so I guess it all kind of started for me in college. I actually went for pre-law, believe it or not.
I could be a lawyer.
Yeah. So that quickly changed when I realized how many years of schooling I was going to need. And yeah, just always had a passion for videography. I actually had an internship at a local gym where I was doing their media stuff. And then the one day I just had the idea to do, social media, videography, kind of package it all together for local businesses. And I went up to the gym owner and I was just like, hey, what do you think of this idea? Do you think anybody would even pay for this service? And he's like, if you pull the trigger right now, I'll be your first client. And then so the day after graduation, that's when it all began.
Oh man, I didn't know that. And so that's part of the thing. I think even when I think about being a teacher, it's what an opportunity to instill a dream, instill hope, or even just flame the fire. Even if you're not one putting the idea in there, that guy didn't put that idea in your head, but he was the one that says, well, if you start that flame, I will fan it until it's blazing. And those are the kind of things that I know people have done for me in my life. even like people say all the time, like, oh, how are you doing all of this? And, my wife, my mom, my daughters, like they're fanning the flame, to help keep this going. I couldn't do this on my own. This isn't for me an escape. I'm not leaving my life to do this. I'm building my life around this. I'm bringing my family with me. We've gone on so many vacations. Since I started comedy, we've gone on so many vacations. We've paid off our roof. We've done all of these things. Oh my, I was talking about this the other day. It's so crazy to me because it really feels like a dream. I was telling Matt before we got started that I, last night, just still processing being at Helium, all these people, 5 sold out shows. I have these merch, these bumper stickers I sell about my daughter that I created that goes as part of a joke. So come to a show if you want more details on that. But like just getting to have those conversations, selling those things, people wanting to buy them, creating a brand. And it's like, wow, I didn't think, I just put my head down. And that's what I try to tell my students, like, put your head down, do the work. Everything will fall into place the way it should. And that whole dream, it's just so wild to me that this is all happening. So my original story was when I walked in the door, I made my first money in comedy. It was $7. It was a 5 and 2 ones from Pep's Pub in Port Carbon, Pennsylvania, which is Pottsville, if you know, like Yingling territory, America's oldest brewery. Shout out. I'm not a fan of the beer. I'm sorry. Not a big beer guy. But I would go up to this place because it was a Friday mic. And like in the open mic industry, if you're not familiar with comedy and how it works, you have a gym. You go to the gym. The open mic's the gym. But, again, it's like a Rocky style gym. And then all of a sudden you're supposed to somehow polish your coal into a diamond and then be able to present it like I did this weekend. And so it's hard sometimes to do that. So this place would offer you time on a Friday. And if you're not a comedian who's making it yet, then Fridays are really open for you. Unfortunately for me, my Fridays are no longer open. But back in the day, they were, and that was such a huge place because they would have people there because, listen, I'm from the coal regions myself, and there's not much going on. So having a place that has free entertainment and, you can get a drink, and up there it's actually you can still smoke in there, which I don't like personally because my clothes then smell, and I feel like I smoked a carton of cigarettes just being there. But, it was just such valuable stage time. I was comfortable there. They loved me, and I could try new stuff. And sometimes they would give you more time, like 7 minutes. I mean, some open mics only give you 3 minutes, but I had to drive 90 minutes one way to get it. So that's where the madness comes in. That's where you're like, what are you doing? On a Friday after teaching all week, get in the car, 3 hours in the car for 7 minutes on stage. Like, now you would drive with other people and other comedians, and Ryan Rins is a good buddy of mine that we're really close even to this day because of that bond we've had in those car rides. So like, there's always something in it that I think is beautiful. But, we did the show up there. It was my first show. I got on my first poster. My name was on a poster. I was like, oh, this is great. And it's just, and maybe 15, 20 people outdoors at this, and if it was awesome energy, felt great. I had some friends came out, and I did my, first set and got my $7, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And we framed it. And then yesterday I went to my tax person. I had to get a new tax person ever since I got picked up by board teachers and some of the other things that have happened. I've created enough revenue that like, I don't even have above ground pool money, but like we have a trampoline though. It's kind of cool. But I do just going to my tax person yesterday and looking at that frame with the $7 and looking at what I was going to have to report. That I was just looking at my wife. I'm like, this is crazy, right? Like this isn't real. Like, and she's like, well, I guess you're pretty good. And I'm like, well, I hope so. And we'll find out. And it's like this journey of taking a chance on yourself, right? Well, Matt did with the media company. And so now we're kind of taking this with each other, which is kind of a cool, like in terms of like teacher and this kind of cool opportunity that we're now kind of helping each other and furthering those dreams. And so that's why I'm loving being here in Sims Media. So if you're a business out there and you don't have a social media game, you don't have Riz, you don't have the drip, that's sus. Okay, so come on over to Simmons Media. Matt will take care of you. And yeah, that's my plug for Max. He's amazing. So getting back into like making the jump, just like Matt said, he had this idea, packaged it together. I had the same idea. So every week, during the pandemic, when I needed a break from work, and I was, trying to carry everybody on my back and answer emails from parents and students and admin and teachers and give them advice and help them use the system. It was too much Atlas with the world, and it was crushing my back. So I would just write jokes. I would talk about my life. I'd take all these topics that were true to me, and now I got to express myself. I didn't get to do that growing up, and I was afraid to do that. And I was thinking, and obviously I'm in therapy, as I should be. Everybody, I think, should have somebody to talk to so that you don't carry that weight, and burden the people in your life with stuff that involves them. If you need to have an outlet, you can go where you can talk about some of that stuff. And so when I was having one of these sessions, my therapist was talking about a book that was part of a book club that they had been a part of. And they said The Four Agreements was a book that they were using in some of their other, groups that they ran. And if you haven't read this, it's kind of an interesting concept. It's basically this old Toltec philosophy, which I believe is like a pre-Columbian tribe in Mexico, that sort of Latin America area. And they were talking about sort of how life happens. And I've always had this analogy to life, that's poker. You get the flop, which is, how you're raised, the circumstances you were put in. That's the flop. You have your hand that you get to look at, and you're seeing how those two worlds interact. And then as you go in, you still realize there's time. You have the turn and the river, which is the fourth and fifth card that come out. Sometimes in poker, you even get a chance to throw back some of your cards to get other cards. And I think we all have opportunities like this, but we also have circumstances. And this book talked about how that life is sort of like that. We have, as a child, we're in the present moment. We're our true self, unfiltered. And then as we get older, sort of this book of law comes in, where the way the world operates, the way we're supposed to interact with each other, because as we become a society, you have to agree and compromise on things. I remember learning in college the word religion, and at this meeting, there was a more philosophy group. So they were looking at it not from faith-based. They were just looking at it from the etymology of the word. And apparently religion in its earliest form stems from the words scrupulous conformity, which is just fancy talk for being the same and undeniably following the pack without question. And you need that when you're trying to start a civilization. People were moving into cities. They had to cooperate with each other. How do you ever get to a level where you're going to have stuff like a fire department and a police force and a government if you don't have people agreeing on stuff? And so you can understand how that could really help society. And I get that, even just from a philosophical standpoint, regardless of how your faith and what you believe. But I always thought that that's so important. So, the world shapes us in a certain way. And so I think we all kind of grow up in a way. And I grew up with a queer family that I was not allowed to talk about in a way that was normalized today. And my daughter came home with a birthday invite from a kid, and it was oh yeah, you just got to RSVP with two of Jimmy's dads, or one of Jimmy's dads. And I'm I was never allowed to say those words. When I had two moms, I wasn't allowed to say I had two moms. I was either my mom and her friend, or my mom and her roommate, or eventually I settled on aunt because it would let me feel there was more of a familial, how I actually felt inside. So I was well, if I get to say family, it gets closer to what she was to me. And I had to do that. But that's lying. That's not what it was. And so I wasn't getting to be my true self. I had to curve around society's boundaries. And so this book is talking about how you can't live your true self if you're always part of this stencil that the world kind of throws over you. And the key to breaking free from that is they had 4 agreements. The first agreement was to be impeccable with your words, which means that you're not gossiping, you're not manipulating, you're not bending around. You're saying what you mean, and you mean what you say. And I think there's something beautiful about that. The word impeccable comes from the Latin word peccare, which is to sin. So now you're trying to be impeccable, which means without sin. So you want to have a clean conscience of what you're saying and that you believe in what you're saying. And that's important. If you could do that, then you can be free of this manipulative. Think of what politics is like. These guys just have to spin whatever they're trying to do so that the masses agree. And that's not being impeccable. Nobody in any press conference in Washington is being impeccable with their words. They can't be. But that's politics, right? Pol, coming from the Greek word for people, right? It's this ability of how do we get people on board with what we're doing. And so for me, like, if you're going to be true to yourself and break free from this sort of like, I don't want to say like, it's just there's two things they talk in the book. They say that a lot of times what happens is as you go through life and things happen to you, if you stay in this sequence of how the world wants us to be, then you're going to find the judge and the victim waiting for you on every corner, right? If something bad happens to you, you're going to play, oh, woe is me, I'm the victim. And if you do something that maybe steps out of the norm to be yourself and be unique, then you're going to have the judge waiting to say, well, hey, that's outside the lines. And when you live life like that, you're really putting yourself in a box. And why? Why you put it? Why am I containing myself? And so this book is all about how do you break yourself free of that so that you're not always feeling like you're being judged or you're judging your own actions or your own feelings, your own thoughts. And how do you make sure that you're also not being woe is me or the victim every time something doesn't go your way. And that's huge. I mean, I think that if we, I know for myself personally, when I reflect on things, those are the two things. Or I complain about, we all of our parents have their own tics, but my biological mom, who lives near me, and I see her all the time. Unfortunately, my other mother is no longer with us, but I get to see some of her idiosyncrasies that I've adopted as being her son, and one of them was always sort of this concept of playing the martyr. I used to joke that my mom and Jesus are my favorite martyrs, and really it was just a matter of she was trying so hard to be a part of the world as the world wanted her to be, and that was denying her true self. So earlier when I said decided, I was like, that's not the right word because, but she was making decisions. So that's sort of why I chose that word, because she was deciding not to be her true self. She was deciding to stay within the lines. And that was not how she was meant to be. She's an amazing person. And anybody who knows her knows that she would give the shirt off her back for anybody. And to think that she thought she wasn't good enough because she wasn't fitting in and that she was being judged and victim made me think, well, I know she wouldn't want that for me. Even if she's still, and she's beyond that now. She's 70, she's living her life, she's living her truth, and she's amazing and a huge role model for me. But I just look back to that time and I'm saying, oh, if there's a lesson I can learn here, then the lesson has to be, I have to be true to myself. I can't worry what people are going to think about something. I can't worry about that. The sexuality of my parents is gonna be a factor in my life, and that's how I lived my life for a long time. And if I'm going to follow these agreements and break myself out of that, so I don't feel like I'm going to be judged, or I'm not going to feel like I'm the victim for not having, done things differently, then I have to think about, are these agreements real? Like, and to me, I don't know. I'm not like, starting a cult here. I don't want you to show up at my house and, leave all your worldly possessions to someone, but I will say I do, as I listened to this book, I thought, oh, I can get behind some of this. Like the first one, be impeccable with your words. I had a roommate in college, Josh Kistner. I'm sure he's not listening, but if he is, that's killer. He was the best listener, though. Like this kid, we happened to get matched up in the same dorm, but I had a roommate who was like selling drugs, and it was like an upperclassman that they threw me with as a freshman because of the housing, and we were a big class. And the kid was like selling acid out of my mini fridge. Like it was like crazy. And I was like so nervous. Like it freaked me out. I was like not around that growing up. I joked that like, they would talk about coke and heroin. And I just thought that was like a meal at the deli. I'm like, oh, heroin must be like a shorty hoagie, right? It's like a female hoagie. So I just didn't get that concept. I was so sheltered. But so I got nervous by this kid. So luckily Josh and his roommate they lived in a triple, but only had two of them. So I would like stay with them because I just was nervous about it. I didn't want to rat him out, but I didn't want to be an accomplice either. So it was like I met him through that, and he was such a warm soul, and stayed with him and stayed friends through the rest of college, and he stayed impeccable with his words. I'd never seen anybody at that age. Like he didn't have his first sip of beer till he turned 21, which he had with me, which was awesome. And I just always respected that about him. And I was like, oh, there's something to that, being impeccable with your words. And that's a guy that, was my age that I looked up to. And, I had another buddy growing up who came into my life later, Steve, who's now like a professor for NYU and UNC and on the cusp of what the AI is and what it means to politics and stuff. It's crazy. Super smart. But these are people in my life that I'm like, they were impeccable with their words. Like, there's something to that, you know? And then the second one was, don't take anything personally. That's what, you know, like, that's being the victim right there. Like, how do you not take things personally? Somebody doesn't call you back or text you back fast enough. Or like a booker, I put a thing out and say, hey, I'd love to be on your show, and I don't hear back, or they tell me the show is full. You know, sometimes how do you not take that personally? You know, and that's, you know, that's something that is hard to work on. It's easy to say, it's hard to do. But like next time you get a text or you start feeling that inclination, like, oh, why aren't they responding to me? Does it mean they don't like me? You know, I listened to this podcast, Second Date Update. It's like a radio segment from Seattle. And a lot of times they're wondering why they're not getting called back and should they be taking it personally. And there was one where the guy found the girl dropped her phone on the date. He picked it up and saw the screen, and the screen wallpaper was her kissing a guy. So he handed the phone, didn't say anything back. And then all of a sudden he like just didn't ghosted her, didn't call her back. Though the radio station, she had him call him. And he said the story about how he thought she was cheating and was putting all these other assumptions together based on her profile. And he's like, oh, she has to be cheating, and that's why she's doing that. Turns out that was her husband who had passed away, and she was just keeping that memory on her phone. But she was obviously on the dating apps now because she had processed that and was ready to start moving on. But he made assumptions, and he took things, you know, personally. And so that's the second and third agreement. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions, because it turned out to be this, you know, beautiful story. And now they actually, you know, ended up going out on a second date. And that's the kind of thing that you wouldn't do if she didn't take that leap and the radio station didn't call. They didn't help break down those barriers. So sometimes it just takes the silliest thing, you know, a question, talking to the right person, taking a chance on yourself. And then the fourth agreement is always do your best. I mean, if you're always doing your best in any given situation, that's like playing poker. You know, I can only do my best. If the hand didn't go the way I want, then I have to bluff, or I have to have a certain affect to maybe make the hand go my way, you know, or you fold and you wait for the next hand, you know. So there's just so much there that resonated with me that I was like, oh, wow, like if I can follow, I know I always do my best. And that's how I got to a level where I was 4 years ago doing an open mic on a Tuesday for 4 minutes to doing 5 sold out shows yesterday and hearing people laugh every 10 seconds for those time I was on stage, and then getting all these great interactions after the show. I mean, that's huge. You only do that if you do your best, you know. And when I do my comedy, I'm not gonna have a hot take on the Gaza Strip. I've lived a life. I didn't start comedy till I was 38 years old. That's hella late, right? I'm not even supposed to. I don't think I'm allowed to use the word hella, but I did. And so now all of a sudden, like, how do I parlay that into, you know, a career? And what does that even look like? I have no idea. And how do I do that and still be a good father, still be a good teacher, still be a good human being? And I think at least a great place to start is these 4 agreements, because at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do, if nothing else, I just follow my tuning fork. If I feel like inside I got this like vibration that's like, yeah, you're on the right track, then I can trust that, you know, and I can be impeccable with that feeling, because that feeling is impeccable, because it's coming from a place where it just knows me. And when everything's in line and everything's in perfect harmony, that's perfect. Whether I used to work in a kitchen and I loved when the line was in perfect harmony, everybody was in synergy, or playing baseball and fielding a grounder cleanly and making a great throw, or having the ball just fly off the bat because you did everything right, you know, or pitching the ball and having everything hit the spot. You know, that was all about being impeccable with your movements and impeccable just with your being. And that feeling is a feeling I think we've all felt, whether we were in Little League, whether, you know, we had a business deal go through, or whether we took a chance on ourselves and made an investment and followed through, or whether you performed in front of a crowd and made them laugh. Those are tuning fork moments. And I think no matter how small the tuning fork moment is, you try to chase that and follow that instead of following a high, or instead of escaping through drugs. If you can just make sure you don't cover it up so that you can't hear it anymore. Because I think that's what happens. We get into mundane life, or if you look at someone who's just going through the motions, they've buried that tuning fork. It's like overgrown, and somebody's got to get a machete out and clear that path. And it starts with the first step, you know? So I don't know what that first step is for you, but that first step for me was stepping on that stage on a Tuesday night, deciding, hey, I'm going to go tell jokes for 4 minutes. And I don't know where that's going to go. But I loved the feeling, and I didn't get paid at all or anywhere near it for the next couple of years. But I was chasing the feeling. I'm not chasing the money. I was proud of those $7. I still look at those $7 every day, and that means nothing if I don't have a family to come home to at night, and if I don't have a job to go to, and I don't have kids to pass on whatever I have within me that maybe they can take with them, and that's what we're all trying to do. So that's my tuning fork moment. That's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm so grateful you stuck in for the episode. I hope you want to hear more. You're going to be hearing how I got into teaching, what life was like for me as a student. I'm going to be talking about my queer family, my autistic daughter, and we're just going to talk. It's just going to be life unfiltered. So I hope you lace up with me, and we'll take this jaywalk together. Thank you. Stay tuned. We'll see you soon.